settle that proposal.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, so I'm here instead of dealing with that.
How do we wind up with nobody here today? No, I meant children performing or...
SAB asked to move to June, and there.
District and may be recorded by members of the audience. Start with the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Brooks?
Here.
Mr. Bialik?
Here.
Dr. Foster?
Here.
Mr. Grupp?
Present.
Mrs. McKessie?
Here.
Wendy is late, right?
She is en route.
En route. Mrs. Sexton? Oh, okay. Mr. Block?
Here.
Mr. Abramson?
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Superintendent's report, please.
Thank you. While this shouldn't be first in my report, it regrettably is one of the most important things for me to announce. So I want to let parents know, in case you haven't been paying attention, that the Pennsylvania System of School Assessments, PSSAs, will be administered to students in grades 3 through 8 beginning next week. Testing schedules are school dependent, so if you want individual information about when your child will take the PSSA testing, please consult each school's website. You are cordially invited. In fact, as we are working tonight, so too are the artists and folks at the Council Rock Art Show. The 2015 edition of the Council Rock Art Show begins tonight and will take place on Friday, April 10th from 5 o'clock to 8 p.m. and then on Saturday, April 11th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Artwork from students K to 12 will be on display. If you haven't been to the Council Rock School District Art Show, I strongly recommend it. It's an outstanding display of student artwork. Council Rock North is holding a clothing drive to raise money for its 8th annual Rockathon. The clothing donations will go to Big Brothers Big Sisters of Bucks County. Clothes will be distributed to a local thrift store chain, and all of the proceeds will go to helping the local children in the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization. The Thon stated charity is Have a Catch for Barb. Council Rock North Student Executive Board is asking students and community members for the clothing drive to drop off donations on Saturday, April 11th, this Saturday, from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. at the front entrance of the school. Acceptable donations include clothing, coats, bedding, purses, drapes, linens, towels, acceptably clean stuffed animals, and shoes. Now is a great time to start your spring cleaning and at the same time help the students who are working on the Council Rock North Rockathon. And for your information, the Council Rock North Rockathon will be held from 7 p.m. on Friday, April 24th to 7 a.m. on Saturday, April 25th. On Saturday, April 18th, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Council Rock High School South, Council Rock School District will be collaborating with e-waste experts to offer a free e-waste recycling program. We'll be accepting all electronic items such as cell phones, personal computers, where they will actually certify a wiped clean hard drive, laptops, same thing, printers, televisions, and more. Small electronics will be donated back to the Council Rock Education Foundation for their fundraisers. Larger electronics like the big old TVs that might be sitting in your garage can be dropped off for the e-waste experts, and they will take care of recycling them in an appropriate manner. Council Rock School District is offering a summer program in academics and technology for students in grades K through 8. Registration is now open. Summer programs include a writing academy, literacy support, a STEM academy, and an algebra academy. For more information, including our entire summer programs booklet, please visit the front page of the Council Rock School District website and look for the summer programs link in the middle of the homepage. And finally, I'm going to invite any other members of our board who saw this last night, I'm simply going to say thank you to the Council Rock Education Foundation and the Council Rock Coalition for Healthy Youth, and also a young man who is a graduate of Council Rock High School, Chris Mahoney. Together, they were able to sponsor last night's program that was put on by Chris Herron, who is a person who has conquered addiction and is out speaking to kids and communities about how that happened. It was absolutely one of the most riveting programs that I've ever seen. I told Mrs. Brooks that I found myself leaning forward on my chair and I had to visibly sit back and relax because you just were mesmerized by this man's presentation. For an hour, an entire audience sat and were just absolutely caught up in his story and in his message. So this is part of the speaker series that the coalition runs. That is the Raising Healthy Kids program series. This was the last one of the school year, but kudos to Council Rock Education Foundation, most particularly Suzanne Ray, for all of the hard work that went into organizing this. Estimates may vary, as Mrs. Brooks will tell you, but probably about 800 and 900 people in the auditorium were able to see this program, and it's the culmination of 2 years of the Raising Great Kids series, and it was a fantastic event. So I thank the coalition and the foundation for this great work, and that's the superintendent's report. Any other board members able to see Mr. Herron last night? I know Mrs. Brooks was there. I know Mr. Taylor was there.
You could hear a pin drop. It was, I've never seen an audience so completely, caught up in every word he said. It was amazing.
Great message for our kids too, and parents.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. We'll move to public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board. We would ask that you limit your comments to no longer than 3 minutes. Please consider the fact that there may be young children in the audience or watching this broadcast live on CRTV when speaking. It is our goal to maintain a respectful environment so that members of our community have an equal opportunity to address the board without interruption. While the board welcomes your ideas and will consider them in deliberating an issue, we may not respond to your comments or questions. We didn't have anybody on the sheet. Is there any public comment? Okay, great. We'll move to the first of the discussion items.
Mr. Desko, the first discussion item we wanted to talk to the board about was the project-based assessment requirements under the new Keystone program from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Mr. Desko has briefed the board on with a memo that talks about PBA. He's here to discuss that with you. There are also copies of that memo out for community, so you can reference also what we are talking about when we talk about our new project-based assessment. So, Mr. Desko.
Good evening. We thought it was timely to discuss the project-based assessment, which is a component of the Keystone exam graduation requirement. And I believe that most parents are probably fairly familiar with the Keystone exams and recognizing that there's a need to pass 3 Keystone exams in the areas of Algebra 1, Biology, and Literature, beginning with the class of 2017 and beyond, our current 10th grade class. However, I'm not sure that all folks are quite as familiar because it's relatively new in terms of implementation. What happens if a student does not score proficient or above in a Keystone exam? So I'm going to apologize on the front end of this because there are so many permutations of what happens with the PBA and what it looks like and how students progress through it. And unless you live it every day, it can be very difficult to understand some of the complexities, but I'll try to do my best to give you a relatively brief summary and then take any questions you may have. So as I said, students who are in the current graduating class of 2017 and beyond must pass the 3 Keystone exams. However, there is a provision built into the regulations when a student, and I'm going to speak in generalities because again there are some caveats to all of these examples that I will give to you, but when a student does not pass the exam after 2 attempts, they then are eligible to enter into a PBA, which is called a project-based assessment. There are project-based assessments for each of the Keystone exams. The project-based assessments are allowed to begin even though a student can continue to take the Keystone exam as many times as they would like. The dilemma is that at some point in time, prior to January of a student's senior year, they have to have completed their graduation requirements so that they can be scored and approved by the state so the student can graduate in June. This current year was our first attempt, and we were one of very few school districts that made an effort to implement the project-based assessment. Most districts held off because the number of students who needed to enter into that were relatively small, because we're just in those early stages of issuing the Keystone exams to that graduating class. But we wanted to get started early to get a sense of what this looked like and how it worked for our students and for our schools. So we did an after-school PBA, where our students showed up on Tuesdays and Thursdays and worked with teachers to process through the PBA. I'm just going to give you a sense of this, because the Algebra 1 PBA, which most of the students were entered into, just to give you a framework of what the PBA is like. The Algebra 1 has 2 modules. A student may need to take only one, but we're finding out that many of our students need to take both modules. So they're broken down into modules, then those modules are broken down into tasks, activities, and questions. Each module runs about 8 to 10 hours. So if you have to take both modules, you're probably pushing around 20 hours worth of coursework in this particular PBA. Module 1 had 6 tasks in Algebra 1. There were 2 to 4 activities in each of the tasks, and there were 2 to 10 questions for each of the activities. So you can kind of get a picture of the amount of time and effort. And what happens is, for each one of those components, a student cannot move on until it's been submitted to a certified teacher on our staff, who then approves it and says that it's proficient, and now you can move on to the next task. So it's a pretty lengthy process, back and forth between student and teacher, before they can complete the module, and then the module then is submitted to the state for a review committee, who would then send it back to us and tell us whether or not the student scored proficient. The dilemma that we experienced in the after-school piece was that there were a couple of things that were very difficult. One is, it was difficult for students because students were there on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There was a lack of continuity in trying to progress through the project. The second thing was that for students who either had to attend clinic or had co-curriculars, there was that constant tug and pull between where I'm going and when. So sometimes they would come one day a week, sometimes they'd miss a full week because they had other obligations, and that inconsistency really made it difficult for the students. So we've been working together as a group of teachers, administrators, and myself, trying to find out how best we could support Council Rock students, because knowing that they must pass this PBA before they're going to graduate. So we put before you a number of options that we are suggesting would be the best ways for us to implement this PBA. The first option would be the opportunity for students to spend 1 week in the summer. Each week would be different at North and South, so we could actually give 2 options to students, because they can go to either one of these buildings to fulfill the PBA obligation. They would then work for 4 hours a day over those 5 days, which would be their 20 hours, which we are hoping will be close to the maximum a student would need to complete the PBA. We believe that would be ultimately the best opportunity for students, because it would be focused, it would be consistent, they can work through consistently over those hours, because the PBA tutor would be on site, who could review their work, approve it, start them on their next task, and if necessary, provide some additional tutoring, which is permissible as long as they're not in the actual module when that's occurring, and we're not tutoring with the exact tasks and activities that are within the module. The second opportunity, because and the reason why we're developing multiples, is we know that none of these will fit all of our students. There's just going to be a lot of complications and conflicts for students. So the second opportunity would be to continue with the after-school choice. That would probably be our least favorite because of our experience this year. However, it could be somebody who is relatively far along in the PBA and just needs to spend a couple of after-school sessions to finalize their work. The other one is a school day opportunity. We've worked with our health and physical education department, who have been very helpful in helping us to design this, where we would take a student out of their physical education class for 1 marking period. They would go through that alternate day course, work with one of our teachers. Again, they have to work with a teacher certified in the area of the Keystone Exam PBA, and Then they would return to their physical education class after completing that assignment. Again, if they didn't finish it over that marking period, they could wrap that up if necessary in the after-school component. One of the issues that we are finding is that when a student doesn't pass their Keystone exam for the second time is really dependent on when the student chooses to take their second Keystone exam. So in most cases, students will take their first Keystone exam in the spring of the year that they have the course. They then, if they are not proficient, we would encourage them to take that exam in the summer offering. However, because the turnaround time is very short, we get the results probably the first week of July. We have to have them scheduled to test the fourth week of July, and we have to provide remediation, and they must participate before they are eligible to take the Keystone exam a second time. We're finding many kids didn't do that, in addition to conflicts with family trips or jobs, etc. So then students typically would take it in the winter of the following school year. We get those results back around March, and now we are trying to determine when to add the third test and or when to start the PBA. So for a lot of those students, that wouldn't be until the fourth marking period of their physical education pull-out if we were to use that. And you can recognize that when you have students across grades 8, 9, 10, and 11 taking each of these exams at different times, that it's becoming a nightmare trying to keep track of where students are, who's taking it once, who's taking it twice. There are variations for students in special education. There's a variation for an MBIT student, specifically in biology because of their time out of the typical high school program. So we have folks trying to track all of this, keep the communications open with students and parents, and then to place them in either another Keystone exam retake, a PBA, or both. So our hope is to try to implement those three opportunities that I just defined for you. The summer 1 week opportunity for the PBA, continue with our after school Tuesday, Thursday, and then also do our pull-out program from our physical education class. Because students would continue to earn their physical education credit, there is an opportunity that our teachers are working with students before school, after school, and possibly even a return to class where they will have to complete some of their physical activity to earn that credit for that marking period. We will also work around, since there's a single health program, we would not pull a student out of their health class in 10th grade, which means we may have to move students to 11th grade health in place of their PE program so that they can enter into the PBA. I do have to tell you that this comes with costs. As you can imagine, when you hear me talking about summertime programs and after-school programs and providing for release time for teachers who would staff the PBA classroom. Right now, we're working off a 0.4 teacher in each building. That will grow over time as more students take the exams, and our hope is ultimately to get them proficient in the Keystone. But if not, that those numbers will grow exponentially over time, and we would provide more sections for the Keystone. I think the way we have it built into the pull-out PE program is probably the most efficient way for us to do it, because we can split those students up over 4 different marking periods, and because it's an alternate day course, we can actually fit in 15 on a day 1, period 1, and 15 on a day 1, period 2, and then do that 4 different times. So we can accommodate a lot of students over the course of a single period in each of the subject areas. So it's probably the most efficient way for us to offer it financially. So again, I know that that could be difficult to understand because of the complexities of it all. I'm trying to give you a broad overview of where we are and what we've learned and what we hope to implement moving forward, and certainly we'll answer any questions you may have about the PBA or the Keystone exam.
Do you have to wait? Do they have to take it twice? Is there an opportunity to go to a PBA after the first failure?
The only opportunity for a student to move after the first attempt at the Keystone exam if it's an IEP decision from the IEP team.
Okay, so a general ed student
Has to take it
has to
twice,
take it twice.
minimum, yes.
And I mean, have you looked at other districts to see how they're how did they offer this remediation? I mean,
We tried, but there were very few, we were the only district in Bucks County who really moved into it with any level of effort with the students. So most districts were coming to us, asking us what we were doing. If you pay attention, if you've read in the paper, there was a big article in the Bethlehem School District and other areas that are just going crazy trying to determine how to schedule this, especially when their proficiency levels are certainly even lower than ours are. So we're struggling when we're looking at, 75, 80% of our students initially proficient, and then probably getting another 5 to 10% of those proficient on the second go around, and it's becoming, huge for Council Rock to deal with. So I can imagine what some districts are going to deal with whose proficiency rates are lower.
is there actually any kind of mechanism with the state where they're soliciting feedback so that they can understand the difficulty that this is posing to districts?
Yeah, really what they have solicited is information to try and make sure the PBA is a rigorous and an accurate opportunity, not trying to lessen the energy that would go into providing the PBA. So there's been no conversation about lessening the keystones or lessening the PBA. There is at the legislative level, there's been conversations now about easing this requirement, but at this point in time, we can't take that risk with our students.
Is there any minimum number of students in any particular topic that you would require in order to run the summer? Or are we going to pay a teacher for 4 hours for a whole week for one student?
Well, I don't think we would do it for a student, and I don't think that this year, other than in Algebra 1, and again, it's because of that phase in. So our current 10th grade class, most of our students will be taking all of our students will be taking their literature exam for the first time this spring. And most of our students who are not in honors biology will take the biology keystone this spring. So most of our students will only have their first attempt this spring. I would think that most of our energies would happen in those two areas with the tutoring and the retesting for the summer. However, our Algebra 1 students will take their third attempt for those that aren't in the PBA already this spring, and we would try to get those folks immediately into the PBA. So we would probably, in all likelihood, only run it in the Algebra 1.
Yeah, because I don't think it's affordable. I mean, I think the students have to wait till the next year, in my opinion, if we're not obligated to do it over the summer.
No, we're obligated to provide remediation. We're obligated to build it into our program, and it must be done during the school day, staffed by school personnel.
Yep.
There are
The
obligations.
dilemma, and I absolutely understand, and you're talking about, we estimated somewhere in the neighborhood of a long-term cost of about $250,000 for all of this. It may be a little less the way that we're describing it now, but this is at its purest level an unfunded mandate. This is, you must do this, and the ramifications aren't minor. If you don't offer this PBA and a kid doesn't get through this, they don't graduate. And it's not something that the kid chose to do. I mean, it's not like they're actively choosing to not come to school or avoid this process. They try the Algebra 2 exam twice, they don't pass it, now you've got to go through this PBA. So I would say that 1 or 2 we're going to try to work with those people, but we don't have a lot of options in terms of complying with the way that the legislation and the PD regulations are written.
I couldn't agree more, but we can't afford, in my opinion, to pay. If my choice is paying for somebody after school, who's there, who can do multiple kids at multiple times, and I'm sorry, but the kid has to miss their extracurricular activities, that's unfortunate. It's not what I want. I don't really like the whole process. But at some point, we have 11,000 kids to educate, and I just can't see us paying for staff to educate 1, 2, or 3 kids in a summer area, and then we're doing once at North and once at South. Like, I just want to make sure, I'm fine if there's 8 kids that want to do it in the summer between the 2 schools, and here's the week it is, or whatever the number is that makes sense. But I just want to say, like, I appreciate all links. I understand we're required, but I don't think we have to do it in the summer and spend that extra money, which to me at least, now maybe you could tell me the numbers, maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but that seems to me to be the most expensive way to do it.
Yeah, well, probably the in-school component is the most expensive because now it's a .2 release time every time you run a period. So,
Okay.
so that's probably the most expensive, but it's also the most efficient because you have the access to more kids. One of the two things. One is we would never run it with a student or two. It just wouldn't make sense to do that. We would need a few students. But more importantly, what we've tried to do is build a program because we're looking at worst case scenarios, which could be significant, that at the end of a 10th grade year, beginning of their 11th grade year, a student could need to complete 3 of these PBAs. If the expectation would be after they test in the winter of their junior year, they would have exactly 1 year to complete 3 PBAs at 20 hours each. So to do that in that small window of only after school or the pull-out program just
Yeah,
wouldn't
wouldn't
work
work.
for those kids. We
Got
have to
it.
have some other options.
Okay.
Mark, Barry, you said 2 things that contradict. You said at one point that it has to be done during the school day or with school personnel.
It's got to be done in school. We get the opportunity to define our school day, so we can just say that's a school activity, school.
Okay, so I have a question. So so it's about 20 hours per. So my question is, and you're using the summer break, and I understand people have summer break. I ask simply because I don't want to have it run at north and at south. So I have to think it has to run at a special time so that kids can get there. Could you use parts of the winter and spring breaks to, we're closed for 4 days at a time? Could you do 5 hours a day for 4 days? Could you do long weekends where we're closed on a Monday and Friday? Yeah, certainly people will say, well, it eats into my travel time. Well, you know what? Not graduating is going to eat into a lot of part of your life too if you don't graduate. So I'm just trying to say, how do I do it at times when the students will be more mobile to get to the thing rather than working around that? So I just wanted to put that bug out there as if you're going to do it, can we use those periods? No answer required here, just please consider. The other thing, though, that is a quandary to me, in the early part of your discourse, you spoke about we get the results the first week of July, we have to have it remediated, and maybe I lost a thread somewhere in here, but we have a number of kids who go for early graduation. So what's the impact for those kids on, are they going to have these done enough in advance? Because our early graduation runs the gamut. We have children who are leaving to go to college who I'm sure will take the test one time and do marvelously. We have other children who are leaving who will probably need to do the assessments. So what's maybe not now, but maybe you want to catch us later and tell us how it works for kids doing early graduation?
We can tell you now, it's a graduation requirement. So just as the completing your 23 credits and completing your graduation project were requirements before we would bring a child to you, if they're not done there and have passed their Keystone exams, we would not bring them before you for an early graduation. They just wouldn't be eligible. The other thing I think is important for folks to understand is that part of the reason why we've designed it as we have, we're required to offer 3 testing times. But the other issue is that we're considering, and let's use biology because that's probably the best example, that a student takes biology in 9th grade and then moves into the likelihood of chemistry or physics or some other courses. If we can't remediate and get to that student both in the second test and then in the PBA, it's an uphill battle because they're not exposed to that material any longer. Same happens a little bit with Algebra 1, except they get a year of Algebra 2 where a lot of those components are applied in that course, and the same in literature where kids continue to see those same skills and concepts over the course of English 11, English 12, but especially in biology and a little bit in math when kids move beyond Algebra 2, we need to find a way to connect that second test and that PBA as closely as possible to when they've taken that course.
The last question in this realm is, help me to understand, certainly we want students to graduate. I just look at this as a potential of making students who just get to a point where they just can't get things in time and who's not going to come, or they're going to wind up, if a student doesn't have, now, so we understand, if you don't have your graduation requirements done, and you're under 21, you can keep coming to school. Okay, so it's not that, I mean, if nobody wants to, you know, but if you're entitled to a free and appropriate public education, and the cutoff is 21 years old, so we tend to graduate students on or about 18, and they're gone. You know, some children with special education things don't get their diploma at that point. Am I wrong?
Yeah,
Well, everybody, he just told me I was right.
21?
For a student with with special needs, we may have the obligation to go to 21.
That's an
Would
obligation.
we also have an obligation for a kid who comes back?
We do.
I don't think I knew that either.
Yeah, we do. We do. And I know that because I had a child in the
So they
neighborhood.
leave and then they come back?
I
No,
had
they
a
don't
child in the
leave.
neighborhood who walked
They'd be
away
a
from school,
13th
came
year
back to
senior.
me, and then, like, this child came back, wanted to get her education completed, and I met with Chuck and the student, and this was, you remember the student, and that was the counsel, that was the counsel from this director of our special education. So I just look at it as, it's a big dilemma, and because I look at it from this perspective, which is, they could fall back to a GED, too.
I know what it is, I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's,
The optimistic
struggle
part of
with this
this
thing.
is really that the legislature will see the difficulties that they've placed school districts in, and before we get to that point, that we'll find some relief, nobody knowing what it is, but everybody hoping that we'll see it. We're planning for the worst, hoping for the best, and I guess
There's
time will tell.
legislation now in place from Senator Dinniman that is, that has the effect of making the Keystone just like the PSSA, but without the graduation requirement, which would in effect take away the PBA portion of it and just have the student have advanced or proficient status with respect to that.
13 years
Instead-
ago, they were going to put ribbons on the diplomas, remember that exercise?
Instead of taking them out of phys ed, which I don't mind, but would we consider a scheduling thing that was called PBA and anybody who didn't had to take it for a half semester course?
We did.
I know you'd have to have different teachers because there's different subjects
Well,
and all
our
that
biggest
stuff,
issue
but
was, what do you do with the child once they finish the PBA? Because a student may only need to do one module versus two. They could finish it within a marking period, and then what do you do with them once they're done, when other students are still? So our issue was to place them in a course and take them out of either a semester or, in that likelihood, a semester course. What do you do when they finish
but
the
I
first
think
mark?
it answers the question of I'm in 11th grade and I haven't taken biology since 9th grade, and although I'm required to do 20 hours, I may need
Yes.
40 hours of remediation to be able to do that biology.
Right. No, we did wrestle with that.
I think it answers that question.
It does, it does. We wrestled with that, and actually, our starting point was to come before you at a very late time in the year and request the approval of two new courses, a PBA Science and a PBA Math, but we collectively, with, our experience has been so far, was to try this route.
Mr. Desko, for the tests that the kids are going to take this year, when you said like 1 or 2 or 3 kids in those classes, I would be thrilled if it were only 1 or 2 or 3 kids
Well,
that
right.
failed the test
Agreed.
and needed to do this
Agreed.
remediation. My bigger worry is that the number will be larger than that and more of an issue. I didn't understand why a child takes 1 PBA and why they take 2. What makes you have to take 2?
You mean the modules
The
within?
modules, yeah.
Okay, because each of the Keystone exams is broken into 2 modules. So if a student could
Fit-
pass one module.
And not the other.
Not pass the other.
Right, I
And
understand
actually,
that.
you could pass one module and not pass the other and still pass the Keystone exam if you scored high enough on the one module. But if not, they have to take that second module and complete their proficiency through the PBA.
So like you, I really hope that the Department of Education comes to its senses and recognizes that throughout the state, the cost of this will be absolutely overwhelming. But if they don't, if we're going to persist this way, then the idea of each school district on their own providing remediation seems insane to me. So then there ought to be, since the keystones are the same throughout the state, regional centers for where kids go every Saturday for a semester until they do the work that they need to do to either pass the test or complete the project. Something like that that's done at Tennant or North, or, you know, kids from all over can come, so that each school isn't bearing that cost in teachers.
Dr. Glasso?
Pardon me?
Where's
Dr.
Dr.
Galasso
Glasso?
job. It's a Dr. Galasso job if there ever was one, but I don't think he can make a profit on this, though, so I'm not sure he's going to be happy
Yeah,
with
get
jobs
to-
that
get
you
to
don't
him
make a
quick.
profit on, you know?
Dr. Lambert, when a student with special needs, significant special needs, is below math or in science, doesn't pass the initial keystone, they don't have to take the second keystone. Must they pass the PBA, or can an IEP team write them out of that also?
If the student has significant needs, they wouldn't be taking the keystones, they would be taking the passive. We still have
No,
that
but
alternate
I'm
assessment.
talking
For the
about,
for the other students,
Resource room students in math or science.
the IEP, they must take the keystone exam once, and after they've taken that keystone exam, the IEP team can waive them from the second administration and/or the PBA. So they can take the keystone exam once, not score at a proficient level, and the team can decide that they're finished with the process. Or the team can decide, we're going to skip the second one and go to the PBA. They might decide that they'll take the second one and then decide to skip the PBA so they can do whatever they.
And then they still, that would allow them to graduate?
It will allow them to graduate. It still appears on their transcript that they scored at the below basic or basic level, but they would be able to graduate. The Chapter 4 language says that they can graduate based on completing their IEP programs.
How did the transcript, it's always fascinating to me that how the transcript contained that information. It seems so awkward because there's an aspect of FERPA that
Well, you understand the mischief that's about to be involved in this too.
you know, that it's just, you put that on the transcript that reveals that the person had an IEP, which
No,
Keystone
just a
results.
proficiency level. Wouldn't say whether they were regular
So
ed
every
or-
student's Keystone
Every
results.
student's keystone exam.
Now,
Yeah, but
ask me
intuitively-
whether anybody's reading that from a college standpoint, and I say it's doubtful, but it's now part of the
I'm not talking about college. I'm actually talking about some of these people may not want to go to college, but you have to do something for your employer, and you have to show them something. So yeah, some people want to see your certificate, and some employers may want to see your transcripts.
On our
Even a high school
website,
transcript.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
On our website, there's a 7-page Q&A that really the PD put together, but we adapted to Council Rock to define the PBA for parents and students and community, so you can access it at the secondary ed website and get some additional details.
And if I may, I'm just going to make an editorial comment. I'm also going to write this out to parents, but we've had a large number of parents, and I mean twice as many as last year or more, opt out of the PSSA this year based on the Title 22 grounds, which are religious reasons. You can opt out of the Keystone too for that reason. You can opt out of the PBA. So if a parent chooses to opt out of the Keystone, I just want to be clear to them, and I will write this to them too, because a lot of people I think have the perception that once they opt out of the test, they're opted out completely. That's not going to happen to your child. They're going to opt out of the Keystone test and land right into this complicated and somewhat bureaucratic PBA mechanism.
Let me ask a million questions. I'm sorry. Do you have something?
I do. I completely appreciate the stresses on our budget and our personnel and scheduling, but I'm wondering what we're doing to take care of the kids that are also going to be very stressed. I worry about their mental health and their psyche and their confidence, and because you're failing a test twice, and then you have to go through this remediation, and potentially on your transcript, and you're facing that graduates. That's a lot of pressure on a young person. And what are we doing? What are we doing to help counsel these kids or help?
I'll just tell you the experience we had with the students that were in the PBA after school this year. It was the teacher who calmed the students' nerves and said, don't worry about it, I'm going to get you through this, work with me, and they just plowed away at it. And when I went in to observe what was happening when they were after school, logging into the computers, you can just see that the student recognized that what they didn't understand, the teacher, tutor would help them with, give them enough examples to allow them to go back on and complete the task, and that student made it through. I mean, just worked, I just can't tell you the time and energy and effort that one child who I followed watched and what they put in. It was over 20 hours, and it was consistent. And that young lady, through her effort and the efforts of that teacher, calmed the situation and passed. We believe will pass the PBA. We have to submit it and get it back, but based on what the teacher has reviewed, she'll complete it with proficiency. I think it's going to rest with our teachers.
The other component to that is all of this adds a different level of stress for parents. So where this was not a particular stress necessarily for parents in the past, now you're talking about whatever it is parents' role is in accommodating all of these scheduling changes, which, to your point, would make me fearful that parents will feel additional stress, and that will also go to the child.
So the PBAs that we're doing now, that's only for algebra, correct?
We had one biology student, because the only students that took the PBA in bio were honors 9th grade students. So we've had,
So they had an
we
opportunity
had
to
3
take
honors
the
bio
test.
students who were honors level students who did not pass the Keystone exam
What-
twice. So
So if they took the honor, they would have taken the Keystone in bio
Ninth
last
grade,
year.
correct.
So when did they take the second test?
in the summer,
Oh.
and then they entered into the PBA and we had a number of students who started the PBA and saw the time requirement and just dropped out and said, I'll take the test again.
Can you
And
take
I-
the
and
test a third time?
You can take the test as many times as you would like, yep, including while you were currently in the PBA. And that's the student's choice, not a district choice.
Two things. One, to Mark's question, I've seen our teachers work with kids through any number of things. This is one aspect. I've seen teachers spend their time talking to kids about who were going into surgery and panicked about what was going on with surgery. So you'd be, there's stresses on kids these days that are somewhat different, and I've seen our teachers deal with a lot of them. Unfortunately, we saw some of that starting this year, and we saw what our teachers are able to do with kids. But I'm surprised Mark and Bill didn't ask. For MBIT kids, they're our students, so we're responsible for this.
We are.
So does everything that we're doing work with the schedules for those children? I guess it would, because we're working around, we're not doing it during the core day. So I guess, Wendy, that's what if we did it during the core day, I guess one of our challenges would be kids who went to MBIT who entered into this program would be just another perspective. I guess we could impose upon MBIT to work across the spectrum of the students within theirs.
And we can do their PE class also.
Barry, you said that because of the graduation paperwork, I suppose that the PBAs and the testing all have to be completed by January 1st of the senior year?
Correct.
So given that would go to Jerry's question about the early graduation. If that has to be completed, by then you would know by January 1st.
Right, but we could have students who complete their Keystone exams and requirements by the end of their junior year or by the summer of between junior and senior year.
And unlike now, where graduation projects do not have to be done by January 1st of the senior year, this all accelerates things by half a year.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you, Mr. Desko. Great job. There's still a lot to share on this as it evolves, but this is a first look.
All right, we'll move to our second discussion item of the 2015-2016 budget. Mr. Reinhart.
I'm going to invite Mr. Reinhart to do the majority of this work, but just as a preface, this is the 30,000-foot view of the budget. This gives you the beginning part of what we're about to do, and you have your budget book with you tonight too. So we're just going to give you the revenues, expenditures, and a sense of where we are. Have the Finance Committee meeting next week where hopefully with the budget book in hand and this overview, you'll be able to take a look and formulate the questions. And then our expectation will be to bring the preliminary budget to the board in the second meeting in April. So, Mr. Reinhart, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is the big day for me because this is when you guys all tell me you missed this or missed that in the budget with any type of typos and things such as that. But I will tell you, we went over this very strong, and it's more than one person that's looked at it. And I just want to compliment the whole administration on providing insight to this budget and the narrative, because reading through this, it really makes you proud of what the school district does and some of our accomplishments. So I'd encourage everyone to really read through the budget book and look at the narrative. And this will be posted to the website tomorrow morning for the public to get. I just didn't want to give the information out until the school board had it first. So you have it, it's the working document that we're going to use. And I will tell you, next week, we will be looking at adjustments that we already have and different things, and you're going to get a much more detailed view of what's going on in the budget next week at the Finance Committee meeting. This is not the intent of tonight's meeting to ask me and quiz me on a lot of different things, because a lot of the answers will be in this book.
No, but it's good for us to have a week to think about
Yes.
what we want to ask when we do quiz you.
You'll have to do a project-based assessment on this.
Yeah, it's not good.
Take
It's
more
not
than
good.
20
Who do we bring in
20
to
hours,
tutor?
What Thursday nights will we spend those 20 hours?
Any questions about the roof?
So Bob, just a mechanical thing. So you're going to post this. This will be the white copy, and we'll keep doing the different colored copies as we go forward.
Yes.
You'll publish all the changes as we make them, and we'll just be able to on the website. I hope you publish it new each time.
Yes,
in its
I
entirety.
believe this is the first draft. The next one you're going to see is going to be the preliminary budget, and then you're going to move into the future process, and any iteration since then, we're going to continue to get more of them and update them. Thank you. So this is a document you've probably seen before, but if you would go to the total pages of the revenues, you would see the total revenues in the budget is $214 million. We're comparing that to the current year revenues in the budget. Estimated revenues is $210 million, so there's a variance, an increase of $3.9 million. I should start with, this is the budget that we're deliberating right now. This is the budget we're under right now. The reason I'm doing that is just so you can see, and it starts to tell you what is causing the changes in the budget. Didn't give you a lot of detail of the revenues, but that is really going to be, if you look, $4.9 million of retirement is increasing this year. The state is going to have to contribute to half of that, so much of the revenue increase is the state contribution to retirement. There are some other places that are positives and negatives, and you can get that answer out of the book. Then I broke this down just into major items for expenditures. You'll see where salaries have gone up at this point. Healthcare costs have gone up this year, and you see that. Previous years they weren't always going up, but this year it has gone up, so that's a significant increase. Retirement is the other significant increase. Other benefits are ways that we're paying flex spending and also 403B contributions. We are no longer putting it through salaries. We are making an employer contribution that reduces the cost for us because we now don't have to pay Social Security and things like that on it. So it's more efficient. So that number really was something that was showing up in salaries in the past, but now it's down here because it's now no longer a salary. The 900 objects, that's everything else in our budget. That's the student transportation contract we'll be talking about tonight. That's Aramark, that's all the big contracts and everything else, and it's also the per pupil allocation that the buildings get. That's about less than $3 million of that, but that's what the buildings go on. I will be detailing that on next Thursday night also to show you really what's causing that to increase. An important thing here now is to show that you take your revenues, subtract your expenditures, and currently where we are is that we would be using almost $5 million of fund balance right now. Last year's budget was $4.2 million of fund balance, and I'm going to talk about that in my next slide a little bit about the differences here and where I think we need to be. Please know that we are able to increase real estate taxes 1.9%. That equals 2.17 mils. And I'm estimating that to bring in about $2.7 million of revenue. If the board, and I'm not suggesting this is going to happen, would authorize that increase, that would reduce the $8.4 million by the $2.7 million. Does everyone see how that works and the relationship? Okay. What I want to do is give you at least a target in my mind on where I believe we can use fund balance this year. If you remember this current year's budget, we are using about $1.5 million of the PSERS rate stabilization money to fund this year's budget. So if you look at the $4.2 million, 1.5 of that is coming out of the PSERS reserve. What I am saying is, based on our plan, this year we're going to go up and we're going to use almost $3 million of fund balance to fund PSERS for this year. As you remember, almost every year's budget, we budget the use of fund balance because of the conservative budgeting practices we have. You have your expenditures a percent under your appropriations. It's about $2 million. You have your revenues come in about a percent above your projected revenues, and that's $2 million. That's about $4 million. So we've been budgeting about $3 million each year because of our conservative practices. And I'm going to knock on wood again that that continues to happen. But that is beyond my control. We budget conservatively, but hopefully that continues. So, saying this, standing here today, I would be comfortable if next year's budget would show the use of fund balance of about $3 million. Does everyone get that? Right now, we have a use of $8.5 million. So either through increased taxes or decrease adjustments to our budget, which I'm calling it needed adjustments to our budget of $3.2 million, this budget will work. That's what we're going to start working on at the next Finance Committee meeting. What I'm going to do is a budget overview and impacts. I'm going to show you where things are, why they are up, why they're down, or everything else. Staffing, Mrs. Triol is going to come and she's going to speak about staffing, show you what's in the budget, what isn't in the budget, and any adjustments there. I'm going to go over revenues with all the guys that like to talk about revenues and EIT taxes and why my number's where it is. And I always say, if you guys want to change my numbers, you just initial next to it so that we'll go over your estimate that year, at the end of the year. And then there'll be open discussion about where you believe it should be. Preliminary budget, we're going to come out with a preliminary budget at that point, and it's going to be with your input. And once we give the preliminary budget, then the work's going to begin with you guys looking at it and saying where you want to be for, we hope, an early June approval of the final budget. So April 23rd, we do the preliminary adoption of the budget. That's my overview. People in the audience and out in the community, please start emailing us budget@crsd.org, and we will answer your questions as we go. And I see a question.
I just want to make sure that something's defined as in our book so that I can formulate my questions. So I'm not grilling you tonight, just to be clear.
I appreciate that.
Okay. So.
Slightly baked, but not grilled.
Exactly. On page F2, there's a column that says 2013-14 actual, but the 2014-15 is budgeted. Are we going to have anything about the 14-15 actual? I know that we have a lot of expenses that come in at the end of the year, but will we have access to any
If you
expected?
want me to do a projection of the revenues and expenses right now, as I sit here, as I stand here.
Not tonight.
I understood that. But I can do that, but I'm going to put all kinds of
Caveats on it. I got it. I know.
because 1% makes a big difference, and I'm off by 1%.
I
That's
know.
99% correct.
I know. I got it. I think it would be helpful, but I don't need tremendous detail. I'm only looking for
got
the
you.
level of detail that's on this page, if that would
Yes.
be possible.
I will do it.
With every
But if I
caveat in the
get
world
a
you want to put on it.
1%,
Got
if I
it.
am off by 1%, that's an A.
I know.
Okay.
And that's $2 million, I know, got it, thank you.
Bob, I have a quick question for you. I have a quick question for you.
Sure,
8
Mark.
years.
On F3, page F3,
Yep.
the per capita, two sections per capita, you have a 232,000 apiece, so the total projected revenue for per capita is 464,000?
Yes, and then we would be able to subtract about $12,000 of expenses off of that. So we would net that out if we're gonna look at getting rid of per capita this year.
Right, and I kind of just want to get a poll from, or an idea from the other board members. Is there any appetite to talk about getting rid of that tax this year during the budget process? Because my feeling is we're spending so much money on the building of schools and a lot of other things in the future, and it would be nice to give a little bit of a break, even if it's just a token to the taxpayers. That's something we can talk about.
I think we ought to look at it like we talked about, which is looking at both of them, looking at both options. I think we ought to strongly consider
We
it.
discussed that in
Yeah,
finance.
yeah, I thought we were gonna,
Actually,
I thought we were gonna get a look at both.
We will
was already
definitely
in the
talk about
finance
that,
committee.
and I
That
will
was already the
show
direction.
examples of,
Consider it.
examples of what would happen as we do the different things, and you guys can mold it the way you want it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, if you, I guess if you pull it out for us, it'd be helpful to see so
Yes.
we understand what the
I-
impact is.
I don't have it in this
No,
book.
no,
but
I
do
know.
have
Yeah,
one
going-
already
going-
that
going
has
into
that in it
Thursday.
already.
Great.
That's how I knew the numbers already.
I get the sense that Mrs. Thomas wants me to speak to this issue.
Well, it's just been
I
your
think it's
issue,
just-
that's all.
Your issue is
I didn't
fund
mean to steal
balance,
your
right?
thunder.
That's my issue.
So, I mean, my position hasn't changed. I'm with Mr. Bialik. I'd like to get rid of it. We saw, when you watch a government body talk about budget, you get into all kinds of contradictions. So the reality is, our pension payments are exploding. It was just shown to us. And yet our EIT income went up significantly more than the monies we get from per capita. So, you could argue that side and say, look, we had a bit of a windfall as the economy improved enough to erase what we get from per capita completely. At the same time, I know that that's a kind of false logic because we have this exploding pension crisis, but I'd still like to get rid of it. It's a stupid tax. It's unwieldy, complicated, and regressive. So, position hasn't changed. Thanks for the kind invitation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reinhart. Look forward to seeing you on Thursday night.
Thank you.
Nice job, Bob, thanks.
All right, so we'll move to the items for board approval. Ms. Brooks, could you read number 1, please?
I move to approve the class of 2015 graduation date as Wednesday, June 17th, 2015. The Council Rock High School North graduation will take place at 4 p.m. and the Council Rock High School South graduation will take place at 6:30 p.m.
Second.
This is just our opportunity to amend the calendar and put the final punctuation points on a 2014-15 school year.
So you're confident no more snow days?
I am not confident in any snow days, but I'll go out on a limb today, and if I have to, I'll recant a day or two here.
There's no rain dates now.
There are no rain dates now. We set up in the Council Rock North gym just in case. And we've tried that a couple years in the past, and it's just been too problematic for parents who have relatives coming in and have made flights, and it just it's easier just to be able to say to people, we're going to do this today, so parents and relatives can be there on that day to celebrate.
We haven't held it inside at North.
Last year.
Last year.
Last year was the other year.
Did we? Oh my God, you're right.
Check your GoPro.
Touche.
Touche, is right, that was a good one.
I forgot. Is that the one where the microphone didn't work? Or that was the other one?
This announcement will go out on a listserv, both from my office and from all the principals' offices next week, too.
I understand what it means, but maybe you can make it clear that that also means that that's the last day of school for all other
Yeah,
students.
everybody, it's all clear. It's a KAM date, last day of kids, for kids, kindergarten. PM will be the day before. It's a half day of school for all students, thanks, Mrs. Brooks. It's all of those things for the last day of school, yes.
Any other questions? Hearing no objections, I'd ask Secretary to record the motion as passing with unanimous consent. Mr. Grupp, read the second item, please.
Sure, why not? I move to approve the SunGard Mobile Family Applications Module Contract Addendum as attached at a cost not to exceed $6,385 for year 1 and $1,252 for year 2, subject to audit.
Second.
Mr. Desko, will you give a quick overview of the new app we're proposing?
Yes, this is an addendum to our contract with SunGard so that we can offer the family app to students and parents that will allow them access to the Home Access Center on handheld devices, both Android and iOS.
How about iWatch?
We'll find out when you get one.
It's not out yet.
Check.
Find
Yeah,
out
soon.
when you get one. Good. Everybody's a little snippy today.
Any questions?
You had a chance to talk a little bit about that at Academic Standards.
We did. We showed some of the screenshots and reviewed hacks so they can get a sense of what you'll see.
I must say, among the conversations we have with parents about Home Access Center, this has been one of the most anticipated additions, to be able to put the app on the phone and be able to check your child's grades from anywhere in the country.
Attendance, bus information, et cetera, yes.
See kids walking out of the building after
True.
high school after they take a test, watching them.
Dr. Foster, did you have a question?
Yeah, so when I read the addendum, it's actually not clear to me at all what's new in it. So is it clear? So I understand what's new. I've been told what's new. I saw it, but I actually don't see the words here that make it clear that what's being added is this mobile capability. So for me, the addendum is non-communicative. I don't know what Mr. Cox thinks of it.
Well, my main concern, as it frequently is that the contract is terminable for convenience, which it is. And my understanding is that what the district is purchasing is set forth on Exhibit B.
I mean, it reads as eSchool Plus.
Mobile Family Module.
eSchool Plus is our student information system through which this pulls the family
It's further
data.
down. I see. There it was further down. Thank you.
The roll call vote, please.
One question,
Sorry, Jake.
just humor me, this is for mobile devices on which platforms?
iOS and Android.
Okay, and so it'll be, and it has no charge, just to be very clear, it has no charge to the individual user?
That's correct.
Quick roll call, please.
Mrs. Brooks?
Yes.
Mr. Bileck?
Yes.
Dr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Grupp?
Yes.
Mrs. McKessie?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton?
Yes.
Mr. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Abramson?
Yes.
Dr. Foster, could you read number 3, please?
Sure. I move to approve web hosting services to eSchool View at a one-time cost not to exceed $8,765 to convert our existing sites and an annual cost not to exceed $10,788 according to the terms of the agreement attached, subject to audit.
Second.
Mr. Frederickson?
When we converted to SchoolWires several years ago, one of the biggest complaints we had was that the teachers didn't feel they had enough time to adapt to the new software. What we're effectively getting, and thanks to a large part from Mr. Cox, working with me and the vendor, is we're actually getting a year of this service for free in terms of the hosting costs. So the hosting costs will not begin actually until next year. But what that will give us is the entire school year next year to train the staff to convert our existing website from SchoolWires to our new service. Our contract with SchoolWires ends next June, not this June, a year from this June, next June. And at that time, then we'll go live with the new platform. And we can go live sooner than that if we'd like, and we probably will go live with portions of it just for testing purposes, but it gives us an entire year.
And just for purposes of explanation, we're moving from SchoolWires to eSchool View because?
Our contract is expiring with SchoolWires, and SchoolWires hasn't been as responsive as we would like them we would have liked them to be to some of our requests for needs. So we went through an evaluation process. We worked with Pennsbury, put together a committee. We evaluated several different vendors, and this is the one that came to the top.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Matt, thank you too. You provided us with some other sample to look at of other schools, and when you look at them, some of them obviously had converted previously because they are look and feel of what they had, what we have in this product. So I was very pleased to see that those attributes we liked, we can continue, and those we don't like, we will move ahead of.
So how much is of this website so you create a web page. There's lists of names or class content, whatever you're creating. That's not on our storage, it's on their storage. So anything that anyone sees on a Council Rock website is wherever this company puts it, right?
I want to be careful here with my answer. If you're going to crsd.org and you're looking at the school web pages or the district web pages, the answer to that question is yes, it is hosted on their servers.
Okay. Right, and obviously if there's a URL linking to wherever, it's...
Well, there are some things that we do internally, but there are bits and pieces like the board video site is ours. Hack, the Home Access Center, runs on our servers locally. So, I mean, the address is still the .crsd.org, but from a web page standpoint, for the school web pages, the teacher web pages, the district web page, those are hosted, yes, on their external servers.
So like here it says you can have staff lists, staff's names, departments, phone numbers, emails. So is there stuff that we put on our website that's actually limited access?
That is one of our concerns with SchoolWires.
Okay.
There are portions of it that are quote-unquote limited. I've not found in my testing for that really to be the case.
Okay.
Anyone who really wanted to get to some of those pages could. So some of the things that we would like to have put on SchoolWires were not because of that reason.
And so in this case, we may be able to do some
Yes,
of that.
this has passed our tests, and they've shown that those areas will be secure and people won't be able to get to them.
But are there nonetheless any guidelines about what we should not put on, even though you judge it to be secure? I
Yeah,
don't.
basically, nothing that would be in violation of FERPA or HIPAA goes on our web pages.
Thanks.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bialik?
Yes.
Dr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Grubb?
Yes.
Mrs. McKessie?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton?
Yes.
Mr. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Abramson?
Yes.
Mrs. Brooks?
Yes.
Mr. Bialik, would you read number 4, please?
I move to authorize a general fund contribution of $650,000 to the refinancing of the Series A of 2010 bond refinancing.
Second.
Questions for Mr. Reinhart? We've gone over this as we talked about the bond refinancing. This just solidifies the amount to be added to that principal.
This is a contribution from the general fund.
Correct. It's a contribution. It's going to be a source of resources that is going to reduce the amount of bonds that we have to issue to refinance the debt.
And
It's actually reducing our long-term debt by using current assets to pay off longer-term debt.
And it appears that the $650,000 is not a finite amount, it's more of an estimate.
Yes.
especially- So, given that, do we need to change the motion to say an estimated 650, or?
The estimate, the only thing that the estimate has done is taken what we've budgeted and what we're going to pay at the end of the year. 95% of those numbers are accurate and certain. What happens is we have about $10 million of variable rate debt where the interest rate goes up and down. That has been estimated for the next 3 months on what we're going to pay. That's the only thing that's estimated. I'm very comfortable with holding this 650. It won't change. It doesn't need to change. I'm really comfortable with it.
So that exact amount will be going to the refinance? Or if it's any different, it goes back into the general fund?
the refinancing will not affect this year's debt service. It's going to affect future year debt service, but it won't affect this year's debt service. So the refinancing that's going to happen in 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to put $650,000 to it. It's not going to change what we pay out the rest of the year, this fiscal year, but it will reduce our debt service that's scheduled to pay future years. Am I explaining myself?
No, go ahead.
I just don't think that you're answering the same question, right? So I think that the question is, will it definitely be $650,000 that you're contributing?
Yes.
To, right, and that will not deviate, right?
No.
Okay. Is that what you're asking?
Is that what you were asking?
That's what it's asking, and according to the documents that are attached, it says it's an estimate, and it also says the total net difference is $649,888. So I just want to be careful using
That's better than 1%.
His question is, do you want us to change the language to not to exceed $650,000?
No, I want to say 650. I'm very comfortable with that.
So, Mr. Cox, are we okay? Because it's more around, do we need to reword the motion?
I don't think so. I think Mr. Reinhart wants to contribute $650,000 and hit the nail on the head.
Got it.
So the motion's fine,
Yep.
in my opinion.
Have a roll call vote, please.
Dr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Grupp,
Yes.
Mrs. McKessie,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton,
Yes.
Mr. Block,
Yes.
Mr. Abramson,
Yes.
Mrs. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Byler.
Yes.
Ms. McKessie, can you read number 5, please?
I move to approve the transfer and conveyance agreement for 4 obsolete district maintenance vehicles to the Northampton Fire Department at a total cost of $1, subject to audit.
Second.
Questions for Mr. Taylor?
Great pictures, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. I think it's great that we're able to have this relationship with Northampton. Were other municipalities consulted? Were they given the opportunity also to bid on this?
I would have to talk to Mr. Crow about that. Typically, we work with the Northampton Fire Department when we have some obsolete vehicles to contribute. We would certainly be willing to work with any other governing authorities in future donations if that were the case.
I would just hate to be just focused on Northampton. I mean,
Sure.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a bad idea to spread it around.
Yeah, we can reach out to Kurt and see if they're interested in some, in future
Right.
vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
And each vehicle is unused and unnecessary to the Council Rock School District?
Yes, they are.
Thank you.
You knew that was coming, right?
I did.
One of you will have to pick up on that, Mr. Abramson. Will have to be someone else's line.
I'll do it at public comment.
Oh, good, you're going to come.
All right. Any other questions here? So, hearing no objections, I'm going to ask the secretary to record the motion as passing with unanimous consent. And Mrs. Sexton, if we can move to number 6, please.
Okey-doke. I move to approve the purchase of Cogent 3M fingerprinting equipment at a total not to exceed $4,995 and a yearly maintenance cost of $600 according to the terms of the attached agreement, subject to audit and solicitor review.
Second.
Among the many, many problems we are facing with volunteer clearances, the one party who is benefiting from this is Cogent 3M because there's, between coaches and volunteers for Cub Scouts and all of the fingerprint clearances we need to do here for volunteers and staff, I would echo what I know Ms. Trioli will tell you is that it just makes sense for us to have that fingerprint machine inside Council Rock for the thousands of people we're going to need to service. So any questions you have for Ms. Trioli, please ask them. We're strongly recommending this purchase.
It's actually a question for the business office, which is, there are other groups, there are preschools and religious schools, any number of people have to have fingerprinting done. Is this a service that we could charge external people to do and provide that as a service? I don't think Bob's really going to know the answer, but...
No, we do know the answer to that. It's contemplated in the agreement. Go ahead, Kristen.
It's actually in the memo that's attached to the agreement. We are seeking to be a private fingerprinting location, but you can be public. Quakertown School District, for example, has made the decision to offer hours to the public, and if we do that, there are fees that are paid back to Council Rock from Cogent, and within that memo attached, you can see what would be paid back to the district. Right now, given the number of personnel that we have to provide fingerprints to all of our staff, plus volunteers and coaches, we would recommend keeping it for just Council Rock employees and volunteers at this time.
The only expansion on that I would ask about and ask Mr. Cox to consider, as he already reviewed the contract, how does First Student get theirs done? So it's not a district organization, but it's certainly, we have an interest in that, and would that be within the scope of this if we still consider ourselves a closed-loop private organization to do First Student, and we'll talk later about how much they charge us for things, to charge them for things.
The First Student contract requires First Student to provide background check history and clearances for any employee that will come in contact with students. And that's built into the price of the First Student contract. So that obligation is on them.
I want to bill them to help them do it.
Do it for them and pull the cost out.
And that's something you could explore. And you'd have to obviously get First Students' agreement to that, because they may want to control that process with respect to their own employees.
And my question to you in this realm was, as it's written, would this contract permit us to do First Student, or can we include in this, while I don't want to be broadly open to the public and pick in people, that we could also do this for any organization that we're hiring? If we're hiring a contractor and they have to get them, that we could charge the contractor for doing the fingerprinting for them. Can you include that in this?
I could. I purposefully revised this contract to provide that the district was not a public site, that it would be a private site, that there would be no obligation. The way this contract was written by Cogent, it provided that essentially the district was a contractor of Cogent, and that it owed certain obligations to Cogent. It had to have certain hours of operation. It had to abide by certain Cogent rules and regulations with respect to how it operated this background check apparatus. And Christine and I determined that it made sense to make it a private type of contract. So the board may have a different view of that, and it can be amended easily to provide for that. But this contract would not contemplate that.
And Rob, my point was, I'm not interested in being a public service within the confines of this discussion we're having right now, understanding that. My quandary here is, this is to qualified contractors who are serving the district. So it's not, if you want to call it semi-public, this is not to provide it to everybody who walks up to the door. This is to make a charge back to those people, or to reduce our expenses to those people, where we're paying them, their costs go up to do this outside. If we can provide it to them and take it off the top, we reduce our expenditures.
Well, and that may be, I think, I mean, this is for someone other than me to do, but I think the district would have to analyze whether that would actually decrease or increase the district's costs.
We can come back and revise the contract. It's not going to change the price, but it's something which I think merits, Christine, I think you're...
I think there's an important nuance that no matter where you elect to get fingerprinted, you pay the registration fee. So the Council Rock employee or the Council Rock contractor will go online through Cogent, register, and they pay the fee. If we would elect to be a public fingerprinting site, then there would be monies that we would make in doing that.
But only through a reimbursement from Cogent.
Oh,
I don't
right.
think the agreement contemplates us charging more for that. Do you, Rob?
No, it
the
does
money
not.
flows from Cogent to the district.
Right.
That was the charge.
And the dilemma in the cost-benefit analysis, and Christine and I have talked with that, and she's done a great job with Rob, is that we have to have people there to do the fingerprinting for anybody that's coming in the public. The $3 per person
So,
may not offset what would be, what is already going to be a tremendous draw on HR time next year to not only do these, but to process the thousands of volunteer forms we're going to get next year.
Right.
I was just looking for revenue somewhere I could find it.
I like the idea of the service, though, for childcare providers in places like this. I think we just have to get through this first phase of thousands of these things coming through us before we can see how we could effectively schedule this and do it well.
Now, that being said, does this contract allow for us to become public during the life of the contract? That's something we can come back to?
The way the contract is designed is, what Cogent has said back to Rob and I is you can elect to be a private facility. The contract, though, when it was sent to us, reads that you're really opting to be a public site. So the changes that Rob made say, no, we're a private site. So the answer to your question is, yes, you could say, we would like to now offer public hours. Initially, Quakertown had decided to be private, and then shortly thereafter opened it up to the public at set hours. I think once we get over this initial hurdle of getting all of our current employees fingerprinted and offering that to them at their school locations, there will be a lull. And then in 3 years, there'll be another bubble. So this might be a good discussion once we get past that hurdle of getting all of our staff done.
Is there, how much time will your office expend? Will it be in doing this? How much of a burden will it be?
Well, we'll have to expend some time next school year in going out to the school sites to provide the service. But with the exception of this school year, we did go visit each site anyway. So it's not a bad thing to bring us out to the school with the fingerprint machine and service our employees, but there will be an expenditure of time.
Will you need more staff to do this, or?
Yes.
We're going to come to you with a half-time staff member because, and it's not just about the fingerprinting, it's the confidentiality of collecting these things. If it touches too many fingers for all of these important confidential...
Figuratively speaking.
Yes, no pun intended, but you understand what I'm saying. So the responsibility lies with Christine and her staff to gather this stuff, so it doesn't go through a school secretary or some kid's book bag and come into school. And that's why we're going to concentrate that time and effort in HR.
So on top of the fingerprinting and the result of Act 153, we have the 168 forms that we're doing for all of our applicants and our new employees. And we, as you know, they have to be sent to every employer where someone has had contact with children. So with the Act 168, and every school district has to send them. So if you have a new substitute who worked at Breezy Point Day Camp 20 years ago, every school district where they're going to substitute has to send that form to Breezy Point. Breezy Point can't do one form and then all of us, every district could use that one form. It has to be each distinct hiring entity has to send this 168 form. So because our substitute pool, our new teacher pool, they work in a variety of places where there's contact with children, we have up to 6 or 7 168 forms for every new person, every new substitute coming on board. So that's becoming unwieldy for the HR staff, and they can only work in a provisional status until we have all of those forms. So we're between the FBI fingerprinting and the clearance updates and that requirement, we definitely have new responsibilities.
Christine, how many users are you going to have? Did you say one? One user?
No, we would
one.
train all of the HR staff, the receptionist, and likely, I think we may train one additional person to use the 3M equipment.
So this is a training package that Cogent puts together that you have to follow?
What I learned from Quakertown, our colleagues there, is they said the 3M did a nice job in providing the training to them. The equipment, it's a laptop, and I think like a standalone where you do the fingerprint. And so we have Neshaminy has purchased it, Quakertown, and I think Central Bucks is also purchasing a unit. So if we run into trouble, we have 3M to reach out to, we have our colleagues, and the IU has a unit too.
And I'm assuming that the training is a certification that you receive for...
I don't know. I don't think so. 3M sends out their representatives and they'll train your designees.
Rob, I read the mutual indemnification, but I'm just a little worried about the liability. So my question is, if a person is fingerprinted and maybe not done properly and those fingerprints go through and they're determined to be cleared, and then, God forbid, something happens, is the district on the hook at all because they were involved in the process?
Potentially. I think, Mr. Bialik, the likelihood, yes. The district could be sued for something like that under an error and omissions standard. And if something goes wrong with a fingerprinting process, yes, the district might end up being a defendant. But I think that if you have to sort of balance the risk. The district is going to be doing this only for people that are coming onto the school's property. So if a background check has gone bad at some point with respect to an individual that's on the school district's property, the district is going to be in that litigation by virtue of the fact that it didn't properly review the background check that had already been done. It didn't properly review the child abuse clearance that had previously been done. It didn't pick up on the mistake that some other agency had made. So I think when you balance it all out, yes, it's possible that the district could make a mistake in the fingerprinting process. But I think the danger of that is more remote than not having any control over the fingerprinting process for volunteers and others who are coming onto your school property and something happening as a result of that. So when you balance the risks, I think that this makes sense from the district's security perspective.
If the training was a certification that said this person is now certified and sufficiently trained to operate this machine, and if we had that certification, I would feel much better about it. But without that, I understand the cost benefit, I really do, but I can't vote for this because I'm just concerned about putting the district in the middle of that loop. And I understand the risk may be remote,
Yeah.
but just for me, it's uncomfortable.
The contract requires the district to abide by Cogent's live scan operating procedures, and completion of the training curriculum is a precondition of the contract. So that's in there. I guess the question is, does the district reduce its risk by having the ability to does it reduce or increase its risk by having the ability to do the fingerprinting in-house and thereby ensure that all of its volunteers and other employees have gone through the proper process? I think on balance, probably the district is reducing its risk. But I appreciate your point that yes, once you undertake to do something, you have to do it correctly. And if you don't do it correctly, the fact that you were the entity responsible for doing it in the first place means that you're potentially liable for it. But I think on balance, I would say controlling the process itself, ensuring, because you have the equipment within your facility and you have people who have been trained in how to use it, that you can thereby ensure that all of your volunteers and personnel have properly had the clearances and the checks. I think on balance, you're probably reducing your risk some. That's my view.
Since we're working in a closed loop system, that we're only doing it for our own purposes, the limited experience I've had with this sort of system in the past, the system includes certain criteria for minimum standards for when it does a live scan. And if it doesn't meet those criteria for a live scan, it doesn't take the scan, it's an invalid. Your finger moved, it wasn't appropriately positioned, those things. The only exposure, so I would think that exposure is going to fall to 3M, who's contacting the database, and they're the ones who validated the system, and it's supposedly a validated system for the contacting the database as it does. The other side of that, though, becomes our processes, and that's the part that, independent of the indemnification, that is incumbent upon us, but it already is, which is to appropriately identify the person being presented and their identifying characteristics. So for me, I don't see it, because if anything else, if someone shows up, they show you picture ID and whatever else, this is going to check a database that once you put in the name and address, it's going to check the database and lock it up. that it's gonna come back and say, I'm either who I am or I'm not who I am. And the system, has internal controls to ensure that if the scans weren't right or they're not, the finger isn't placed correctly, it's not gonna go. Much better than the old print them, send them in, and hope for the best. It's much improved, so I have no issue. And the identification is our own problem. We have it already, which is the identification of individuals. This will further that identification.
So asked a different way, if we didn't do it ourselves and someone else did the actual fingerprinting and somebody was on our property through a mistake, we're still going to be at risk.
You're still probably a defendant in the lawsuit.
Yeah, so it's...
So what's the flow of information? Someone gets scanned, the fingerprint goes through the wires to this company, or do we store it, or do they store it? What happens to the scan?
So the first thing that happens is if you want to have your fingerprints done, you as an individual register through the Cogent website, and you then have a registration number. You would make an appointment to come here, or if you're our employee, we'll be coming to you. And then, I'm not trained yet, so I'm a little bit assumptive as far as how I'm explaining this, but the registration number is entered, and then the record comes up. We're able to take the fingerprints, and then what happens is a confirmation number comes up. When someone gets an FBI done now, what they give us is the confirmation number. We then look up the confirmation number to get the results.
Okay. And it used to be when it was ink, you'd send them off somewhere and they'd say, you know what, we're going to keep them for 5 years and then we're going to throw them away. But when someone gets their fingerprint scanned now, is it just stored forever?
I have to ask that during training, what happens within the Cogent system, but now when our new hires or our current employees give us the confirmation number, we look it up and we then scan, or we then hold on to the results of that.
And so one of the things, this is an incredibly complex and very time-consuming process, but one of the things that is now required is that this gets done every 3 years. So one of the interesting things is that I've never been fingerprinted. Many people who are in public education have never gone through this process. Now the process will be, so if within a period of time there actually is something that's happened and it's not been public, this fingerprinting process and the state police process and the child abuse clearance, all of those things are designed to pick those things up now on a regular basis.
So we maintain in our office, we have separate files for the Pennsylvania criminal check, the child abuse, and the FBI, but our electronic system is where we track the issue date and the expiry date. So we're using our employee self-service system for all of our employees, so we know when the clearance was issued and when it expires. For all of our employees who were hired beyond 3 years ago, the expiry date is 12/31/15. Now, many employees have already renewed, and we enter that into the system. The expiry dates are visible to our employees through ESS, so they also know when they're going to expire. So we're using the technology to facilitate the workflow, but we do, Dr. Foster, have to maintain the copy as well.
And this is not pertinent to this vote, but just as a reminder, if someone's a resident for 10 years in Pennsylvania, the cost of the total clearance procedure is less than if they're not. What are the total costs?
So for your volunteers,
Right.
if they have been a resident of Pennsylvania for 10 years or longer, they may do an affidavit that we're working on having approved. But for employees, that does not apply. That's only for volunteers. So your Pennsylvania criminal record check, I think, is 15, and the child abuse is 10. I may be switching those, but.
Okay. But if you don't have that affidavit, then there's another.
So if you have not lived in Pennsylvania for the last 10 years, then you would have to do the FBI clearance. We've been working together as a team administratively to develop volunteer protocols, and Rob is reviewing those now, and they're going to go out to all of our Council Rock community. That includes parents, so that everyone can see what the process will be for our volunteers. The central place for collection will be at Human Resources. So instructions are coming along with the affidavit as well. Just give us a week or two.
Yeah, and Mr. Cox's input on that will be important because these volunteers are not in many cases, they're not our employees, and so here we are, custodians of information, and anyway, thanks for looking at that.
Any other questions? Have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Grubb,
Yes.
Ms. McKessie,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton,
Yes.
Mr. Block,
Yes.
Mr. Abramson,
Yes.
Mrs. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Bialik,
No.
Dr. Foster,
Yes.
Ms. Thomas, you read number 7, please.
Sure. I move to award student transportation services to First Student, Inc. for a 7-year term according to the terms of the attached agreement, subject to audit and solicitor's review.
Second.
Word
That
attached is...
was a torture.
Yeah,
My
the word
apologies.
attached is in the printed motion twice, so that needs to be modified, but I didn't read it that way. Painfully, I read that motion.
Did we
Are
get
we
a
gonna
nice
make
job?
presentation
How much
here, or are we
money
gonna go
is
straight to
going up?
discussion?
We have, I'm sorry, I was just crossing
okay.
out too many attached. I apologize. Mr. Reinhart has shepherded this along with Mr. Pinero. Mr. Pinero has graciously agreed to be here to help us with any questions. We briefed the board a number of times on this contract as we move forward through the bid process and then through the process of getting permits at both Wrightstown and Newtown. I'm pleased to say that both of those hurdles have been conquered through the good work of Mr. Pinero, Mr. Reinhart, and a number of our folks who have gone before the various townships and received the permitting. And so we're now ready to give you the first student agreement after all of the work we've done, and we're happy to answer any further questions before we go to vote.
Bob, can you just remind me, what's the benefit to us for the 7-year contract?
What's occurring here is we are going to have all the diesel buses replaced with new propane buses replaced. As you get a shorter period of time, the capital costs are being amortized over a shorter period of time, and it's increasing the cost. A 7-year contract is letting us spread it over 2 more years, and we believe that was a proper time frame to look at it.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
Can you, first of all, it was a lot of work, so I appreciate the work done by Jen and the business office in general. Can you give a brief overview? Propane sounds kind of new and innovative, so I know we've spoken about it many times, but just some of the high points about why we're doing propane, the operational efficiencies of it. The numbers are a little mind-boggling when you try and get through them all. So let's talk about the operational efficiencies for a few moments.
Yes. Propane is a fuel that burns much higher temperature and much cleaner. Unlike a diesel fuel bus where it may idle and it smells and there's black soot that is around and everything such as that, if you put a tissue paper behind the exhaust of a propane bus, you will get water out of it, but it will be no carbons or anything that is coming out of it. It's 80% cleaner than diesel buses. The fuel costs are significantly lower also. In fact, that's where the savings are going to be. We look at it over 7 years. I have estimated that we're going to save about $2.5 million in fuel, well, in the total cost of it. The fuel cost would be more, but we're paying a little more because of the cost of the buses. Another thing that occurs is on these cold mornings, people have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, start up the bus and let it run as a diesel bus for 45 minutes before you can start it. Propane bus will start up automatically within, I guess, minus 40 and above degrees Fahrenheit. It'll start up, and within 7 minutes, the compartment will be warm because of the way it runs. It's much more efficient. I think I see it's 20 quarts of oil in a diesel bus when there's only 5 quarts of oil in a propane bus. The valves and everything, they say you take it apart in 5 years, it looks brand new, as opposed to a diesel bus with everything that occurs.
It's also said to be quieter, isn't it?
Very much quieter. They said it'll sound more like a pickup truck than a large bus. I can go on. I'd rather have the professionals here to talk to you about all the safety issues and everything else.
The one thing I want to make clear, because it sounds kind of new and innovative, is that the range on the buses has been described to us to be in excess of 400 miles on a full tank. So, you know, most of our buses, we're not taking school buses over 200 miles away. So that's kind of, they're not going to be running out of fuel by the side of the road.
Right.
And then you'll get into as well, and we'll see that in a second, which is, it does mean we're going to change the fueling structure at our depots, and that's going to be the next motions coming after this.
Yes. I think it's a win-win, and I need to recognize Jack, because Jack's the one who brought this to us and shepherded it and really said we need to do this, and I think it's going to be beneficial for the community.
I struggle with this one a little bit. You guys have done some terrific work. You know, we're going to be more respectful of the environment to the folks who are around the buses, and you guys have found ways to save money by going through propane. But it's disappointing to me the amount of cost built in that the district's going to have to absorb with this contract from this partner. So what I commend you guys on is the work that you've done to offset the increase in costs that this partner is passing along to us.
You're using a term there I want to be very careful about, because you're using the word partner.
Vendor.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Sorry.
Wendy and I, in cooperation with Mr. Reinhart, met with First Student. We had a very limited number of bidders on this. One, First Student. It was put out broadly, but they were the only one who came back. And being the only bidder, and when they're opened in public, they know they're the only bidder, trying to get price concessions is almost impossible. We attempted to work with them to drive some other alternative financing, to review or discuss their benefits costs and the comments that they made regarding that, or to come up with other ways of phasing in implementation, all with an eye toward saving money. And if they were a partner, there would have been receptivity and some discussion on that. It hurts me, or it pains me to have to say that there was no receptivity, there was no partnership in that. So while we appreciate the service they do, they handle a lot of our children, they are, I will tell you, they're a good partner to Jack, because Jack in his day-to-day business with them partners with them. But from a cost perspective, they're a vendor.
I brought this up in a committee meeting, I guess about a month ago, that the transportation contract seemed to be conditioned on the approvals of the fueling stations from Wrightstown and Newtown. So I suggested maybe having a conditional contract with First Student based on those approvals. From the memorandums that you submitted to us, it looks like you have still a step to go before it's finalized. So should we hold off on this contract until the approval process is complete?
You're speaking of the permit from the labor and industry.
Right.
I believe
there are actually probably three pieces to. There are three shoes that have to drop. In Wrightstown, the district had to secure conditional use approval to install the propane facilities in order to fuel propane buses. We represented the district in front of the township, and the township has approved the conditional use required to install the tank there, but we have not yet received that decision in writing. We expect to receive it any day. In Newtown, the process was much simpler, and the district was required to obtain a permit for installation of the tank there. That has also been approved by the township, but I have not yet seen it issued in writing, so we're waiting for that as well. With respect to the permit from L&I that Mr. Reinhart was just about to reference, our understanding is that that will be forthcoming any day, but we haven't received that either. So all three of those conditions have to be satisfied before any of these transportation contracts become binding. The district's obligation to purchase after this first student contract, assuming it passes, the district will have to engage roads, which was the lowest proposal with respect to installation of tanks and supply of propane. And the two roads agreements are contingent upon one another because the district doesn't want to be bound to buy fuel from roads until and unless it has entered into a contract with roads to install the tanks, which can't occur until we have those three approvals that I referenced. So all three of the agreements that are before you tonight are contingent upon one another, and they're also contingent upon those three approvals that I mentioned. And so the reason these contracts are subject to solicitor review is because I have to make sure those concepts, among others, are built into the written agreements, assuming the board approves them, prior to Andy signing them. So those details are important. They're not yet worked out, but it looks like they will be, and so that, in large part, is my job to ensure that the contracts all reflect that.
So let me ask this then. If we approve the first student contract, there's no way we could get stuck with diesel if something happens with the approvals of the other two?
Correct.
Because they're contingent upon
Because the first student contract will be contingent upon installation of the propane tanks and the contracts with roads. And the way this will work is we will have the three approvals the way I would propose it would work we'll have the three approvals from the two townships and from the state in writing. Each of the contractors, roads, will sign its two agreements that meet with my approval, and then first student will submit its agreement. So we know that all three are signed. And then assuming the board approves them tonight, Andy, you would then sign all three at the same time. And so all three would become binding at the same time, and there would be harmony.
Is there any delay in waiting the extra week? You expect to get the approval for another week, in another week or so?
There's somewhat complexity with that because the installer is responsible for getting the permits. And you put the cart before the horse. They have done things for good and goodwill for us to get some of this permit, and they've worked hand in hand with us to get these permits done locally. But the labor and industry, they have submitted now. But we need to get this to first students so that we receive the buses in time. And that deadline is next week, that we have to get it to ensure that the buses are going to be here in time. So I would really appreciate having this agreement done tonight. This has happened. We had to wait for Wrightstown until Monday night is when we got the formal go-ahead. I was at the meeting. They did say yes. We don't have it in writing, but they voted yes. So that's why this is happening so quickly. Originally, the meeting was supposed to happen the 23rd, but it got delayed until the 6th.
So we're going to have a change to the contract that's before us, and again, signed by the board president without at least me or others reviewing it.
What change would you contemplate, Rick?
Well, if it's going to be subject to solicitor's review, I'm assuming that it's going to have built in that there's going to be a contingency clause that all the approvals, those three requirements are
We
met.
expect the approvals will be, I think the only thing Rob's saying is that absent the written approvals, we're just holding off until they all come together. And we expect them in early next week, the written approvals. We know that they're all approved. That's the hard part about this is we've had the verbal, but you do have to wait for the written, I understand that.
And I don't see it in writing,
And you won't, because, and the reason for that is, there will be changes. If you vote tonight, there will be changes to all three contracts that occur subsequent to the vote, and here's why. First Student did not get us their comments to my changes until today. and roads did not submit draft agreements until yesterday. And so I made changes to all of those documents, which they're still reviewing. And I suspect they will have changes to mine. And so, you know, there are a lot of moving parts with this transaction, and the documents are currently under revision by both sides. So it's likely that there would be changes subsequent to tonight. And I don't mean to step on Bob's toes or Jack's toes. I know that the deadline that they mention is a real one, according to First Student, with respect to delivery of propane buses. But there will be changes to these contracts if the board votes tonight and subsequent to that vote.
I have another question. I don't want to interrupt that. If anybody else wants to talk about that. Mr. Reinhart, what is the increase in transportation cost for us for next year?
From budget to budget?
Yeah.
If you remember that the past few years, one of the budget variances, favorable budget variances, was the transportation contract where we would underspend it. That is gone now, but I think the increase is about 3% when you look at budget to budget, because
Okay,
we
so
always
let me ask you a different
underspend.
question. What is the increase in the amount of money we'll pay to First Student?
That's, you know,
I thought it was 7.5%.
estimate, it is going to be more like, it's more like 10% if you look at actual to actual.
Okay, but because we get a credit, isn't it?
The fuel costs are so much less that that's where the savings is coming in
I'm sorry,
place.
the fuel cost.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm willing to take that into account for the sake of this. The cost of First Students who gave us the best price,
Yes.
the increase in that cost is 10%.
It would've
Because
been-
we're changing to propane, we're deferring that cost, and the net of the buses, getting new buses is 3% on the district. I get that. But First Students' increase to us is 10%. Is that
Yes.
correct?
If we stayed with diesel buses, it would have been like 7.62%.
Oh, that's
So
where I remember 7.
that's the
Okay.
difference in what we're talking about. It's-
Okay, so it's more because we chose propane, but the net is down to 3.
Yes.
Even if we had stayed with diesel, we would have had a 7 and change percent increase in
Plus, we would
cost.
spend a lot more for
Okay,
fuel.
I just think it's important because there was some comments about decreases here. I didn't want anybody to, I'm playing Jerry Grupt on TV. I didn't want anybody in the public to be misled that our cost for First Student was going down. My extreme displeasure was in a current economic environment education to have somebody increase costs to this district at a rate of 7.5% was outrageous to me. But they were the lowest bidder. So I just want some of the real facts to be said. And so my conversations and our engagement in meeting was to say, you do understand this is on the taxpayer's back. We have pension costs increasing. This is not an affordable percentage increase. But basically, it is what it is. So the best we can do is convert to propane, get some of these credits, and we're ending up net 3%, which is great work. And it was a good proposal to go to propane from First Student as well. I don't want to say there was nothing positive from them. But my clarity needs to be that the increase that was given to this district after putting out an RFP on transportation was a 7.5% increase in that cost. And that's one of our largest line items after labor, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'm in no way defending, because it's a huge increase, and I agree. I just want to point out that there was an excuse that was proffered, according to the memo that Mr. Reinhart and Mr. Pinero created. So there's this line that says that their healthcare cost increased 96% over the past 5 years. I mean, we don't have access to their
You
books.
really want me to discuss that?
You know, I have to tell you, we were in the meeting.
You really
This
want
is-
me to
this
discuss
is-
that?
This is an area of Wendy's professional responsibility,
Right, and that-
knowledge.
How late do you
It
people
was,
want to
it
be
was
here?
like watching a spider and flies.
I mean, it seems like an
My
outrageous...
blood pressure's going up with every word.
It seemed, well, I read it because it seems like such a profoundly interesting assertion. I mean, that's,
The comment in the meeting was that perhaps you need a professional to take a look at that, because the numbers you're telling me in any publication in the Philadelphia area, the number of, the percentage increases that you're quoting for your situation are at least double what anybody's publishing.
so that was
So,
that was not a good
You
approach
deal
for
with
them
that how
to
you
take.
want,
Right.
but that's not an excuse for me.
Right. I agree.
Well, to deal with that is.
But it is
on
my
us.
problem. Right. And the other problem we have is everybody else was higher than them. So it's not just a problem for them, it's clearly a problem for everybody who bid. I think we had 3 people come back on the transportation bid, or was it
Yeah,
more?
we originally had 7 vendors that came to visit us.
Right,
and
but
then
how many?
There's only 1 that actually gave us a proposal by the end.
First two.
So was not just a problem for them, to be clear, but
This
anyway.
is, so everybody's aware, the complexity of this is really quite boggling, because you not only work into this, the fuel costs and the leasing costs and depreciation, all that. There's also an aspect of it, because all of the buses will be new, will have among the highest reimbursement by the state, because the state decreases your reimbursement per bus as the buses age. All of our buses will be brand new. It's not a minor expense for them, but it's still, and when I say that we were trying to figure out ways to assist them with that, we offered to consider going with half the district to be diesel now and allow them to keep the younger of the diesel buses for another 2 years. We were met with deaf ears.
Do they have seatbelts yet?
Seatbelts are not required in the state of Pennsylvania. There's an open question about whether they are a positive or a negative on a school bus. The construct of the seats is used by the industry and by the National Transportation Safety Board to say that the passengers on the school bus, because of the construct of the seats, are safe. That's their argument. I understand your personal concerns on that, but we all have them. But
Any other questions for Mr. Reinhart? Have a roll call vote, please.
Mrs. McKessie?
she stepped away from
Oh. Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton?
Yes.
Mr. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Abramson?
No.
Mrs. Brooks?
Yes.
Mr. Bialik?
Yes.
Dr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Grupp?
I hope nobody reads in this. I'm going to say no because I just don't like that we did it. I recognize that we have to do it, and we will do it. My only purpose is I don't want this to look like the board as a whole was happy. And I'll put a no vote up on behalf of everyone on the board who's not happy to have taken their increase. But I don't care. We can say yes, but I think we need to be on record somewhere as
All
opposing
right,
it.
we good. We good.
So it's not, I'm not showboating. I think the board as a whole can't be seen to say that we accept it. And I know that board members put it up reluctantly to say yes.
Mr. Abramson, can you read number 8, please?
I move to award the propane fueling station installation according to the terms of the attached agreement to Rhodes Energy Corporation at a cost not to exceed $244,722, subject to audit and solicitor's review. The cost associated with the installation of these stations will be paid from the Capital Reserve Melsky funds.
Second.
This is the propane tanks, so this is, again, this is where our permitting had to happen. This is where Doug Taylor helped, kind of move this around with Bob, and again, Bob and Jack did the major work in terms of getting the permits. So again, to Rob's point, this is all contingent on working together, but there will be required, how big are the tanks?
Pardon me?
How big are the tanks, Jack?
18,000.
18,000 gallons of propane.
Would anyone be opposed to doing these two together? I mean, I think you're either going to vote for them or not vote for them.
Not at all.
I mean, doesn't,
Makes sense.
That's fine. Mr. Abramson, can you read that second one as well, please? Number 9?
I also move to award propane supply services to Rhodes Energy Corporation for propane fuel at a cost not to exceed $1.3062 per gallon for the 2015-16 school year, and $1.3112 per gallon for the 2016-2017 school year, according to the terms of the attached agreement, subject to audit and solicitor's review.
Thank you.
Whose second was that?
Jerry.
Okay, yes. Second.
I just have a question, the verbiage in that motion. I don't know how clear it is with the second price, $1.31, 1.3112, that's not to exceed. I see with the whole, I think it probably could be looked at either way. So can we add a not to exceed, or is that too redundant in that second part?
Is that acceptable, Mr. Abramson?
Yes.
Agreed.
So not to exceed each of those prices.
I read it that way, not to exceed.
You did, but it's the second one.
Right, right,
And
but
it does
but not
carry
to
over.
exceed, right. It
I
says-
understand, but
It says and, so.
Are there any questions for Mr. Taylor, Mr. Reinhart? Have a roll call vote, please.
Mrs. McKessie?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton?
Yes.
Mr. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Abramson?
No.
Mrs. Brooks?
Yes.
Mr. Bialik?
yes.
Dr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Grubb?
Yes.
All right, moving on to board items. Is there any old business? I've got 2 items of new business. The first one is, as a result of a prior motion at a previous meeting, we are required to have a liaison, or I think actually a board member, with the Council Rock Education Foundation. I believe, Ms. Brooks, you've done that in the past. Wanted to formalize that here tonight, so.
Well, I currently serve on the board of directors, so if there's any other board member
Yeah.
who would like to.
You know, I would,
Are-
actually. I'd like to get involved with that and frankly, learn more about that group and see how I can help as a Council Rock alum. I think I'd add some value there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you busy Monday night?
Well,
We have
You are now.
I am.
The next meeting is this Monday at 7 o'clock.
Thank you.
And in addition, as you know, the state requires us to complete a comprehensive plan. Mr. Desko has asked for a couple of volunteers to serve on that committee. Ms. McKessie has done that in the past, as I believe did Mrs. Heenan. Kyle, is that something you're interested in continuing to do?
The daytime meeting times would be challenging.
Yep. Is there anybody else who would be interested in participating on that?
I would.
It would likely be a single evening meeting, late afternoon, 4:30, later.
But you've not done it before, you can either do it like.
Okay. Dr. Foster, Ms. Brooks? Great, thank you. You got what you need, Mr. Desko? I said you got what you need? Sorry, I was a few days late on that. We'll move on to the committee reports. We'll start with academic standards.
Mr. Block,
Oh, I'm sorry.
under new business, is
Oh,
this,
I'm sorry.
just because it's not on here, is that also board comments?
I'm going to
New
move to board
business?
comment after public comment.
That's fine.
So we'll go to the committee reports.
Academic standards met tonight, where we met with the curriculum coordinators who are recommending textbook approvals, which will be coming to the full board, I believe you said in May. So basically, all the curriculum coordinators review the textbooks in use. They get renewed in cycles somewhere between 8 and 12 years. So after 8 to 12 years of use, they move to upgrade and update. There will be a PowerPoint posted online to show the specific details broken out by courses and what books and costs. The books are on display in the classroom across the way, and they will remain there through next week. So if any board member who wasn't here tonight wanted to look at those textbooks during next week's finance meeting, that'll be available to you. The total cost of the textbook approvals will be $394,475, which is a little bit higher than last year, but Joy and Barry are going to put together for us an analysis of the last, what did we decide on, I don't know, 5 years or 10 years or something, history of what this looks like. So you can see this cost amount in the framework of what it typically looks like. In addition, tonight we talked about adding a new course to the offerings at the high school next year called Honors Experimental Research in STEM. And this is a little unusual because normally new courses are come to the board for approval in the fall because they get included in the program planning book. But this was a special and unique opportunity which will allow 12th grade students only to participate in some unique research opportunities that, quite frankly, I mean, I think it's extraordinary to offer this at a high school level, the kind of thing that you would experience most frequently in college. So it's going to be offered next year as a shuttle course at North. Details are coming. Barry's going to send, has this been sent out by email yet? I can't remember. The description of the course? Okay. So that will come so everybody can read it, and if you have any questions, Barry would be available, and this will be coming for our approval next meeting. And then there was also an overview of the Home Access Center, which was interesting because now, there, of course, we voted to approve the component for the app. So, you know, all across Council Rock, alerts will be bringing when grades come in for students. But that PowerPoint will also be available online with the minutes. And our next meeting is May, what's the date? May 7th. And we will be having a discussion about middle level things, which I think is really appropriate as we're talking about building and rebuilding our middle schools.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, I couldn't make the meeting. So the STEM course, is this a genesis of a grant or a teacher's idea? Just wondering.
Teachers' ideas.
Teachers in what subject?
Science.
Okay.
The conversation did start with some offers from the community to put something together similar to what's being done in a couple surrounding school districts with some very interested members of this community of scientists saying there's resources out there and potential funding as well as mentors for this. And it was very quickly picked up by some people, particularly those that do the science fairs. They've done a lot of work, and you saw some of the results with the work we sent out today of kids doing very high-level projects that are resulting in scholarships to school and funding for the kids. So I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately we can get some extra funding for this. And as I said to the Academic Standards Committee, a lot of the money that's coming out of the state is contingent on some of these efforts to actually get more state funding, and STEM is number one on the list.
No, I'm thrilled, and the fact that the teachers thought of it. I mean, it's always great to get a grant, but I just wanted to know where it's coming from. I think it's tremendously positive. Kudos to the teachers. It's great.
I mean, the conversation at the meeting was it's hope that it's just a wash in terms of staffing, because basically you're going to take students who have previously signed up for something else, move them into this, which could collapse the number of sections you need elsewhere. We're not going to actually know that until it all moves forward.
Right.
But even in a worst case scenario, it's one class time, so it's a 0.2 addition. But it's just so innovative, and you know, it brings in partners from outside the school district. It advances things. I mean, there was a community email today about the successes we've had in the science fairs. I mean, this just allows that momentum within a school day, because all those other things are extracurricular, and then you have to pick and choose. So this offers an opportunity for students who might not otherwise take it, and it has to be, it's for a very specific student, because you have to have the appropriate background, science and math, and the initiative and the interest. So it is a niche thing, but in the end, I think it has the potential to be a huge win for everybody.
I also think when we start offering something, it gives younger students something to think about and look for. When they're in 8th grade and they're looking through the book, they're like, well, what is that? And it creates interest and excitement around an idea, and it's such a hot topic right now and so relevant. I think it's tremendous.
The other thing is that what we said is that it very well could lead to, you know, just through the hype and the conversation and the public relations on it, it could lead to other relationships in other entities that could be this could be implemented in other areas. So this is sort of like testing the waters, but there's certainly, it appears, tremendous interest through our students who have so much initiative and talent that to funnel it this way is great. And then, of course, we're grateful to the teacher at North who has agreed, to develop this.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Ms. McKessie, do we have anything for facilities? I think we skipped one.
No, it feels like a very long time since we've met, and much of what we discussed at the last meeting was discussed at our subsequent board meeting, and we will meet at 6:30 on the 30th.
Excellent. I know we have a finance committee next week. Mr. Grupp, anything else?
Our last finance committee was February 26th. Our previous one from March 26th was deferred. The board met in executive session, I believe, on some other personnel matters. Our next one will be Thursday.
NBIT.
Excellent, thank you for asking. Our meeting, unfortunately for Mr. Bialik, is this coming Monday, so he'll have to be in two places at once. And we discussed the content of our last meeting at NBIT at our last meeting here. But we did, some of us had the pleasure of eating lunch today with Representative O'Neill at NBIT, and uppermost in our mind was discussing these background clearance issues that we spent some time on tonight. And so, for the tech schools, the background issues have some extra difficulties because we run co-op programs. And so who at a business that you're partnering with needs these clearances? Representative O'Neill said, the bottom line is when this kind of legislation passes, you have one scenario in mind, perhaps out of Penn State or where have you, but there's all of these ramifications that really are not envisioned. And so they're working their way through that. It sounds, though, that we're pretty much stuck with the legislation. It's not envisioned that there's going to be any dramatic changes in it. And so I guess our plea was to make it faster, cheaper, easier. He and his head of staff were sympathetic to our concerns, and it's always good to meet and discuss with people what your issues are. We also talked about the Keystone exams. We talked about the pension problems and the prospects of pension reform and their bills in the Senate. We talked about PSEA testing, and Representative O'Neill's a great person to talk with because not only is he on the education committee, but he was a teacher, so he has administered PSEAs in his personal past. On the Keystone exams, for what it's worth, his opinion is that graduation requirement will come to an end. So hopefully all that discussion we had earlier tonight will magically evaporate. It depends on the legislature to make that happen, but he seemed to think that it was likely to go that way. So I don't know whether we can pick up our phones or what have you, but hopefully that will be the case. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. Ms. Sexton, anything from the IU?
The IU meets again next Tuesday, and I just sent all of you the mid-month IU board report, autism awareness.
Thank you. Anything from the solicitor?
Just to announce executive sessions on March 26th, the 29th, and April 7th on personnel, and there will be an executive session on personnel following tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Is there any public comment?
Are you going to instruct them in the rules of public comment?
There's
I think
13
we're good.
of these, one for each board member, one for each table, one for Doug, one for Mr. My name is Nancy Kara. I'm from Newtown Borough, and I make mistakes. Last week I said physical when I meant to say fiscal, and I also named Holland Middle when I was Newtown when I was talking about Holland Middle. So I'm here tonight to correct that record and to suggest millions of dollars in savings for the middle school projects. If you think the taxpayers can afford $110 million for these schools, I say there are other schools, a whole capital planning book full of needy schools that need things, and we need technology infrastructure throughout the district. So let's save money at the middle schools. First, let's go with Holland Middle. Holland Middle has 32 classrooms for 7 teams. You only need 28 classrooms for 7 teams. And each of those classrooms will be empty 2 periods a day when the teacher goes to lunch and the teacher has a prep. There are 7 science rooms, and that has the same thing. If there's 7 teams, each of those will be empty for 2 periods a day, and that's a total of 14 periods of empty science rooms. It has science projection rooms. I suggest we turn them into prep rooms so that teachers can share science rooms if you ever go to 8 teams and have a place to prep. There's 8 small group instruction rooms and 7 full-size classrooms for special ed, which will probably be small group instruction. In addition to that, there's an 1,000-seat music room and 3 large group instructional rooms, one on the 2nd floor, and the upper end of the auditorium is divided. There's teleconference, 2 computers, all kinds of special rooms, multiple storage rooms, administration, nursing, offices, all the things that a middle school needs. I am suggesting that you take the alcove out on the 1st floor for maybe close to, I think it was close to $2 million in savings. Then you'll be down 4 classrooms, which you'll be back to 28. 7 times 4 is 28. And the 2 SGI rooms that are there, I think they're 640 square feet. I suggest you take that music room on the 2nd floor, divide it in half, and you have enough. So let's look at that. At Newtown Middle, I suggest you downsize the entire project by 10%. And there's also 7 science rooms and a large group room for 6 teams. If you only had 6 science rooms, each of those would be empty 2 periods a day. And those rooms at Newtown Middle have a prep space in between every science room. I'm suggesting you take out the 7th science room and the large group instruction room. If they need to meet in large group instructions, let them go to the auditorium or the cafeteria when there is no lunch. Take out those 4 classrooms. You have to bite the bullet. Either the 7 teams are at Newtown or the 7 teams are at Holland. So if you're not going to put the 7 teams at Newtown, then you can further downsize Holland. If you take and turn the science room sideways and take out those 4 rooms that you don't need for the 7th team, then you'll get rid of a lot of corridor space, because if you don't put those 4 classrooms in the corner, it's just going to be corridors around. Lastly, I'm not the only person in this district who could make suggestions on how to save money on these middle school projects. So I suggest that you put up on the web a middle school savings at crsd.org. The taxpayers are paying for it, and they have a right to weigh in on what they think of the cost of these buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Any further public comment? Okay, we will move to board comment. Mr. Bialik, you had something?
Yeah, just as we're going into dealing with the budget, during the process of looking for a replacement for Mr. Klein, we had the opportunity to look at other districts, and I have to tell you, particularly from a person who is probably very critical about things or looking at things, and sometimes times when I don't know that I'm being critical about, looking at other districts, I'm very impressed with how well we run things, and I was surprised to see some of the numbers I saw for other districts like size. So not disparage other districts, but I'm proud of the work that everyone's done here. I just want to say that.
Thanks.
Not me, I'm coming with my bazillion questions for you, big guy.
Baked or roasted?
Well, I'm not saying that we shouldn't press for
No, I know
More
you're not.
work.
I just have to tease Bob. I'm just teasing Bob.
All right.